Hey ho everyone, Anne O'Connell with OC Publishing, and welcome to today's WIP Tips. Very exciting. I'm loving this little, interlude once a month to, share some insight into the writing process. I do lots of workshops and retreats, so I have lots of material to pull from. Seems like I kind of like the whole idea of scenes, because the last time that we did a WIP tip, we talked about creating floor plans for scenes and being consistent with sight lines and things like that. I really think that, a scene is really what holds a story together. And I called today's a scintillating scenes. So that might have triggered your imagination that we might be talking about romance or, steamy scenes, but that wasn't my intention. But we'll talk about scenes that come alive and draw a reader in. And us authors are often asked, are we plot driven or character driven? And I believe, of course, you can't have one without the other. So, one might sort of be the primary driver. But I think when I really sit down and think of it, maybe I'm scene driven, but that changes from day to day. Every time you sit down for a writing session, there's going to be so many moving parts that come together. And this morning, when I looked out the window, the scene is quite a winter wonderland. We're April and we're having a snowstorm. So I'm glad I didn't pack away my winter clothes. But let's get to it. So we're talking about scintillating scenes, creating scenes that come alive for the author, really using your five senses, because as the author, you have in your mind exactly what that scene looks like. But unless you can use all of those senses and sort of a wraparound 360 view to describe what that scene looks like, you're not going to successfully bring the reader in, and you're going to leave them feeling a little sort of out in the cold, or like here, or on the outside looking in, or the inside looking out at wherever your main character is. I often like to share some of my favorite, writers and authors' advice, and, use examples. And that I always say that read a lot. When you're trying to establish your own author voice, it will come through the more you write, but, emulating some of your favorites is always a really good place to start. And when you're reading a book, make sure that you look at some of the scenes that really draw you in, and why is it that they do. So one of my favorites writing gurus is Anne Lamott, and I probably have shared this before, Bird by Bird. And in her section called Set Design, she talks about imagining yourself as the set designer in a play or a movie version of the story that you're working on. So she says it may help to know what the room or the ship or the office or the meadow looks like where the action will be taking place. You want to know its feel, its temperature, its colors, just as everyone is a walking advertisement for who he or she is. So every room is a little showcase for its occupants' values and personalities. So it's really important when you're building that scene to also think about how the character or characters in that scene are reacting to their surroundings emotionally, physically, and how it's impacting them and their behavior. So that's why, the place that a plot line takes place, the actual location, can have a very strong influence, or should have a strong influence, on how that character behaves. It gives layers of information about our past and present, who we are, our shrines and quirks and hopes and sorrows, our attempts to prove that we exist and are more or less okay. You can see in our rooms how much light we need. So how many lamps, how many light bulbs, candles, skylights, what is bringing light into that room or not bringing light into that room? Like, are the lights burnt out? Has the power been cut? Ooh, suspense. See, those things in a scene create so much action and life, again, to bring the reader into that scene. The mix in our rooms is so touching. The clutter, the cracks in the wall belie a bleakness or brokenness in our lives. So those are kind of metaphors that you can then also weave into that scene. Like Anne says, the cracks in the walls. Are there also, cracks? Are you heartbroken? Have you been broken because of, a history of abuse, things of that nature? Photos and a few rare objects show our pride, our rare shining moments. So these are just some examples, and the things that are in that scene can also, they could be red herrings. So something that takes the reader's attention away from, the real clue of the mystery or the affair, or whatever plot line is evolving. Or they can be something that foreshadows what might be coming up, and you hear the whole metaphor, or the discussion about, you don't show the gun on the night table unless that gun comes into play later on in the plot. So that's really important, that you don't throw your reader off to the point where things don't make sense anymore. So the real importance is to, when you look at your scene, to really dig down, to drill down into the minutia, the minute details. So if your hero or heroine is hiding from something, where is she hiding? Or he? Behind a bush? What kind of bush is it? Is it a big bush? Is it dense? Like, so nobody is going to see them? Is it short? They have to be crouching behind that bush? Is it a rhododendron? Is it a rose bush? Are there going to be thorns that poke and make it hard for the person, your hero, to stay quiet? So those are details that are really, really important, and drilling down into them is key. So again, I want to share some excerpts from other authors to kind of illustrate. And I can't resist using one of our very local best-selling authors who's recently released a historical fiction that has been a top seller for weeks and weeks on Globe and Mail, Toronto Sun, Toronto Star, bestseller lists for a long while. So I'm going to read just a little excerpt from Donna Jones Allward's When the World Fell Silent. So if you've read this book or are familiar with it, it takes place in Halifax, Nova Scotia at the time of the explosion. So When the World Fell Silent. But this scene, the Halifax explosion, most people are familiar with. This scene is actually just after the two ships collide in the harbor, but the explosion hasn't happened yet. So the main character, the heroine, is walking down the street, and she says, "Pardon me," I said to a cluster of ladies who were talking animatedly, "but what's all the commotion this morning? Has something happened?" "There was a collision in the Narrows," one woman explained, her face bright with excitement, "and now one of the ships is on fire." "But another ship is out there trying to fight it, see?" The second woman pointed toward the activity on the water. I looked out toward the Narrows, the area where the harbor narrowed like the curve of a woman's waist before emptying into the broader Bedford Basin. The basin had proved to be the perfect place for ships to wait safely until they were ready to head out to sea, crossing the Atlantic in the protection of convoys. But this morning, safety seemed elusive as a ship, I couldn't make out the name on the side, burned, little explosions bursting into the air at random intervals, rather like fireworks. While crew from the other ship attempted to put out the blaze, The ship on fire kept drifting closer to the pier. They won't let the boat hit the pier, will they? I asked, worried. There were dozens of dock workers down there, and a burning boat with no one at the helm was a dangerous thing. So it really does draw you into the scene where, you know, the main character is standing watching this story unfold. If you've never been to Halifax, but you're familiar with what a harbor looks like, and then a basin, you know, a dockyard, lots of workers roaming around. And then it also makes you, you know, want to know, oh my goodness, there are these little explosions. Is something worse going to happen? And of course, you know, spoiler alert, if you are familiar with history, of course, there is a rather large explosion that levels miles and miles of the city of Halifax. So another one of my very, very favorite authors is P.D. James, rest her soul, mystery writer. And I was looking for examples, and an article was written where she said the setting, not the bloodletting, comes first in a P.D. James novel. But she mentions this in the interview. So this winds up being the headline. And I thought that was really a clever sort of way to look at it. You know, make sure that, you know, if the first line of the book is, you know, there's a dead body, then, you know, immediately following needs to be some of the scene that leads to what happens with that dead body. But she says, what usually comes first is the setting. I can have what I think is a strong response to the spirit of a place. I can perhaps in an old house or a community of people, a lonely stretch of beach, and say this is where it happened. So I kind of approach it the same way. And whenever I see something unusual or unique, and as authors, we do tend to see the quirky side of things. I always file that away because hoping it may wind up, you know, helping with a scene in a book. So one of the places that I used to love to visit when I lived in Dubai was the Gold Souk. And you had to cross the creek to get there because it was quicker than going all the way around. And I just wanted to read a really short excerpt that hopefully will bring you into the scene, bring it alive for you, and sort of help you picture in your mind what it looks like on the creek in Dubai as you make your way to the Gold Souk. The Abra clunked against the dock, and the people already standing swayed, but, used to the motion, remained upright. Susan hopped off and turned to take Chrissy's hand to help steady her as she stepped on the gunwale of the small boat and straddled the 2-foot distance to the wooden dock, then safely made the final step to land next to Susan. The women laughed and linked arms and headed into the throng of shoppers, mixed in with seafarers, weaving amongst crates and cloth sacks, filled with everything from pashminas to dragon fruit and a plethora of spices. The pungent smells of cardamom and curry wafted around them, making Susan's mouth water. Hang on to me, I don't want to lose you. Susan tightened her elbow, bracing Chrissy's hand against her side. It's just a few blocks this way. She pointed to the street perpendicular to where they stood. Lead on. Chrissy's cheerful attitude was infectious, and Susan felt her tension disperse into the atmosphere around them. Aromatic with heady perfumes one moment, and odious with the body odor of sailors the next. It was an assault on the senses, but that added to the one-of-a-kind experience. They started single file down the narrow sidewalk, allowing people coming from the opposite direction to pass. At the first corner, Chrissy stopped at a storefront to admire the shop display. So hopefully that brought you into the scene, onto the dock, and as they head across the street to the Gold Souk. One of the things that, little piece of advice when you're describing, you know, a feeling or a sense, sometimes it's hard to come up with descriptors that are fresh and different. One of the resources that I've used in the past is The Emotion Thesaurus, which is kind of interesting, by Angela Ackerman and Peggy Puglisi. They have a whole series of thesauruses that really, and if you turn to it, it just starts to spark some ideas, as you're sitting there and you're going through, how am I going to describe this taste, or how does this scene make me feel, or your hero. Sometimes it's fun to thumb through resources like this just to spark some ideas, and it'll probably spark something that you hadn't even thought of. So I often like to thumb through that as well. So just a couple of examples. I have one more. I didn't realize we were already at a 15-minute mark, but I really wanted to share this with you because, we talk about all different genres, and one of my favorite books, and a very popular one, is this one, Nurse, by Francine Cosman, and it is a memoir, and it's about her nursing training. And we all draw from personal experiences when we write our books. When you're writing memoir, it's all personal, and I just found that Francine had a very brilliant way of describing a scene that really made you feel like you were there with her. So she's training. She was a pediatric nurse, an OBGYN nurse, did lots and lots of deliveries in her career, and this is one of the first ones. The delivery room was a place of electric tension, as at any given moment something could change. My memories of the case room include the sense of mystery and urgency, the joys and sorrows, the atmosphere, and the expectant fathers who paced in the waiting room and asked many questions. They were nervous as they listened to the strange sounds their wives made. In that day, very few men wanted to be in the delivery room. However, the times were changing, and fathers began to accompany their wives to be present at the birth. While some were a great support, others passed out on the floor. Clunk. Another man bit the dust. They would come to, very embarrassed, and get on their feet again. That would mean looking after 2 patients, but the trend would continue to grow until it became the norm for fathers to be present in the delivery room. It seems hard to believe now, but it was the students who were called upon to administer ether. If mid-forceps had to be used, the patient had to be sedated enough not to react and risk a high tear inside the vagina. I held the gauze mask in its wire frame above the patient's mouth and nose and dribbled ether from the can. I'm going to hold a mask over your face, just above your mouth and nose, I would say. I won't clamp it down, and the ether will stink. I want you to just listen to me as I tell you to breathe deeply and slowly. You'll feel the room spinning, but it only takes a few breaths, and you'll be asleep. Work with me. Come on, you can do this. The woman would start to lose consciousness, and it was at that point I clamped the mask down over her mouth and nose and administered more ether. I recall one doctor yelling at me, "Pour it on, girlie," as he struggled with the forceps. I didn't pour it on. I applied a small amount more, as in my opinion, any more ether would have killed her. I covered this by dripping the ice cold ether over one side of my hand, holding the mask, fooling the doctor into thinking I was following his command. I reeked of fumes after the delivery. I truly hated the smell. So we're right there with her in the delivery room. And I think that's a brilliant example of setting a scene, bringing it alive, and drawing the reader into that scintillating scene. So that's it for today for WIP Tips. I really appreciate you having a listen in, and I hope your writing projects are coming along and you're making good progress. And you'll join us next time on WIP Tips. For now, I'm Ann O'Connell, and we look forward to seeing you again on WIP Tips. Bye for now.